During the second semester of senior year, the daughter of the richest family, Emily Carter, confessed her love to her childhood friend, Ryan Williams. He didn't accept. Instead, he came to me, someone who had always quietly liked him, and confessed his feelings publicly. I thought he was sincere. Believing him, I naively followed him into his reckless lifestyle, letting my grades plummet. I completely fell from the pedestal of being a top student. By the time we graduated, Ryan and Emily announced their relationship publicly. That's when I overheard him belittling me to her. He found me journal and read the cruel truth. I had liked he for over a decade, but to him, I was nothing more than a pathetic lapdog. Who would genuinely like someone like that? He had written, I only got together with her to make sure she'd give up her university admission spot for you. I promised your parents that I wouldn't let her ruin your grades. If I couldn't even do that, how could they possibly let you marry me? I stumbled through my days in a fog, until one day, I was hit by a truck. The pain was unimaginable, searing through me. But my final thought wasn't regret for my death. It was fury, anger that I hadn't slapped that bastard when I had the chance. When I opened my eyes again, it was the day of Ryan's public confession. There he was, standing in front of me, holding a bouquet of flowers, his face full of affection. Without a second thought, I slapped him hard across the face. Ryan Williams had confessed to me during lunch break. It was the busiest time, with plenty of students around to witness the scene. He suddenly rushed out of the crowd, scattering rose petals from his pocket onto the floor. Dropping to one knee, he held out a bouquet of baby's breath. Sarah, he said, his voice passionate, I love you. Please be my girlfriend. Kneeling amidst the scattered pink petals, he looked up at me expectantly. Around us, students, eager for some drama to spice up their monotonous high school lives, started cheering and teasing. I stared into his eyes, which brimmed with what seemed like sincerity, but all I felt was a cold chill of disgust. If I hadn't already relived this moment, I might have fallen for his performance again. We were both orphans, growing up in the same orphanage. We studied together, worked part-time jobs together, and relied on each other to get through tough times. In my past life, I had been infatuated with him. I eagerly accepted his confession, even vowing under the disapproving gaze of my teacher to stay by his side forever. After that, he started dragging me along to skip classes, passing me notes during lectures, and even suggesting before graduation that we experience the joy of being adults. My grades tanked, and every time I tried to focus on my studies, he conveniently appeared to pull me back down. Back then, I foolishly believed that love could conquer all. I ignored my teacher's warnings, even fantasizing about marrying him after graduation. Looking back now, I can't believe how utterly stupid I was. After we graduated, Ryan announced his engagement, not to me, but to Emily Carter, the same girl who had confessed to him. When I saw the post on social media, I ran to confront him, but I stopped when I overheard their conversation through the door. They were discussing wedding plans. Ryan's tone was full of disdain when he mentioned me. She's just a lapdog. I only got close to her to make sure she wouldn't distract you. Ruining her future was just a lesson. Early relationships are a bad idea. If it helped you succeed, then it was worth it. I promised your parents I wouldn't let her affect your studies. If I couldn't even do that, how could they trust me to marry their precious daughter? Emily giggled, pouting playfully. You two were childhood friends, and you even dated for 6 months. She must mean something to you. Right. Ryan laughed mockingly. Never. I don't even remember how I left that place. I didn't have the courage to burst in or slap him. The next thing I knew, a truck had plowed into me. The pain was excruciating, but all I could think about was how I hadn't slapped him when I had the chance. Now, as I watched Ryan kneeling in front of me, trying to kiss the back of my hand, I didn't hesitate. My hand shot out, delivering a slap that seemed to cross time and space. He froze, stunned, before forcing a smile. Sarah, are you nervous? He asked, awkwardly shoving the bouquet into my arms and leaning in to hug me. I kneed him in the groin and followed it up with another slap. As he crumpled to the ground, I looked down at him coldly. I don't like you. I will never agree to date you. From now on, stay away from me. I've already cut ties with you over the past month. Why don't you understand that? I glanced around at the crowd. This show's over. Go back to whatever you were doing. The confidence Ryan had shown during his confession evaporated, and the surrounding students were equally stunned. After all, everyone knew how much I used to like Ryan Williams. I had followed him everywhere, practically glued to his side. Even though I had kept my distance over the past month, no one expected this. Ryan thought it was just a minor spat between us. Even if I had rejected him, surely I didn't need to humiliate him like that. Climbing awkwardly to his feet, his face darkened with anger, his eyes flashing with malice as he glared at me. Sarah, have I spoiled you too much? Did I give you the wrong idea that you can push me around like this? His voice dripped with arrogance as he continued. Let me tell you something. I confess to you because you're a girl. If you don't agree this time, there might not be another chance. You're just an orphan. Who else would want you besides me? His tone reeked of self-importance, and a smug expression spread across his face. He even dared to boast. I already know you like me. Just apologize now, and I'll pretend nothing happened. Standing there, full of confidence, he seemed to believe I would beg for forgiveness. After all, in all the years we'd known each other, I'd never had such a serious conflict with him. Even when he forcibly brought Emily Carter into our social circle after she transferred to our school during senior year, I had only sulked in silence for a day before reconciling with him. But this time, I merely scoffed. What's wrong with you, Ryan? Did Emily pass her narcissism on to you? You're delusional. My words were sharp, and my eyes gleamed with disdain. Yes, we're both orphans, but we're not the same. You have nothing going for you. No looks, no grades. Do you really think someone like me, who's always been at the top of the class, would ever fall for a loser like you? My words cut like a knife. The mockery in my voice pierced straight through Ryan's fragile ego. His face twisted with rage, his body trembling. Of all things, Ryan despised being mocked for his shortcomings. Yet, ironically, he had so many weaknesses that even the smallest jab could set him off. For years, I had tread carefully around his insecurities, protecting his sensitive heart. But now, I didn't care anymore. You dare to humiliate me like this? He stammered, his hand shaking as he pointed a trembling finger at me. This is all an act, isn't it? Playing hard to get. His voice grew colder, his tone laced with malice. If not for your diary spelling out how much you like me, I wouldn't have bothered with someone as desperate as you. Don't think I didn't see it. Your little pink notebook stuffed in your desk. You've been in love with me since we were kids, haven't you? Following me around like a lapdog, even spending your hard-earned money on me. God, you're so annoying. Faced with his failed confession, Ryan's desperation turned into venomous insults. He tried to salvage his shattered pride by degrading me, but there was no way I would let him regain the upper hand. I noticed a teacher approaching. Drawn by the commotion, my eyes instantly welled up with tears, my lips trembling, as I put on a defiant yet vulnerable expression. What's going on here? Why aren't you all eating lunch instead of gathering here? The teacher's stern voice broke through the tension, and most of the onlookers scattered in fear. A few bold students stayed behind, jokingly claiming they weren't hungry. I didn't bother answering. Instead, I turned and strode into the classroom, retrieving a pink notebook from the deepest corner of my desk. When I returned, the teacher had already been briefed by the remaining students on what had happened. Knowing my reputation for being obedient and well-behaved, the teacher decided to hear my side of the story first. My hands trembled as I held the notebook high, glaring at Ryan with fiery determination. This is the diary you're talking about? The one you claim is full of my so-called love for you. Ryan smirked confidently. That's the one. There's even a page filled with my name. Isn't there? Isn't that proof enough that you've been secretly in love with me? Turning to the teacher, he added earnestly, see, I'm not lying. She's been obsessed with me for years, even interfering with my studies. I only confessed to her today because I couldn't take her harassment anymore. His words were delivered with such conviction that even the teacher seemed momentarily swayed. Sarah, what's going on here? I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I opened the notebook and showed it to the crowd. The surrounding students leaned in, curious. Ryan, on the other hand, eagerly awaited the uproar of gossip and the sight of my face crumbling in humiliation. But neither happened. The students glanced at the pages, then turned back to Ryan with looks of disdain. What is this nonsense? There's nothing in here. One of the boys in our class muttered, rolling his eyes. Ryan, are you delusional or something? Ryan's triumphant smirk vanished, replaced by confusion and panic. Ryan always thought everyone liked him. The teacher sighed, a faint trace of disgust crossing their face. Ryan, having confidence is a good thing. But right now, your most important task is to focus on your studies. Stop creating trouble and distracting Sarah from hers. Look at this. Do you really think this is some kind of confession diary? This is just a notebook of wrong answers. Ryan's expression froze, his face stiffening. He rushed forward and snatched the notebook from my hands. When his eyes scanned the densely written mistakes and study notes inside, his face turned ghostly pale. This can't be. This is impossible. His voice was frantic, his expression twisted with disbelief. It was supposed to be a diary, supposed to have everything written down, proving you've been secretly in love with me. His gaze darted to me, wild with accusation. Where is it? Did you hide it? Before I could respond, the teacher and surrounding students quickly stepped between us. Compared to Ryan, who was impulsive and prone to anger, I had always been known for my excellent grades, good looks, and kind nature. It was clear who had the upper hand in the teacher's eyes. The teacher shielded me and fixed Ryan with a sharp glare. Ryan, that's enough. If I catch you bothering Sarah again, I'll recommend to the school that you be expelled. The scholarships and spots you've been granted were hard enough to secure, and they weren't given to you so you could waste time harassing other students. The teacher's words were direct and merciless. Ryan's face flushed a deep red, a mix of shame and rage making his fists clench tightly. He glared at me as though he wanted to tear me apart, but under the teacher's watchful eye, he reluctantly lowered his head. I'm sorry, teacher, he muttered. It was my fault. I apologized to Sarah. I promise this won't happen again. I watched him leave with a cold smile, his defeated figure retreating down the hallway. Some people think their plans are flawless, but unfortunately for Ryan, I've been through this before. I've been reborn, and it's been an entire month since my return. That month gave me plenty of time to prepare. For instance, the diary that dragged me into the abyss in my past life had long since been burned, replaced with a notebook full of my study mistakes. The events of that day spread quickly thanks to a few loudmouth students who had been watching the scene. Soon, the whole school was calling Ryan Narcissus, laughing at how he was like a toad dreaming of eating swan meat. People sneered at the idea that he thought someone like me had been in love with him for years. The humiliation was so intense that Ryan didn't come to school for several days. When he finally returned, it was hand in hand with Emily Carter. How did I know this? Because on his very first day back, both of them were immediately summoned to the teacher's office. Curious, I asked my seatmate what had happened. She grabbed my hand excitedly, her voice buzzing with gossip. Sarah, you missed it this morning because of the competition. Let me tell you, it's official. Ryan and Emily are together now. And get this, Emily was the one who confessed to him first. The scene was so ridiculous. It made Ryan's confession to you look like a masterpiece in comparison. He was so moved by her words that he started crying and hugged her right there. And then, she leaned closer, whispering dramatically. They kissed, right in front of the teacher. The poor guy fainted on the spot and had to be rushed to the hospital. I stared at her, stunned. You're kidding. I'm not, she insisted, nodding vigorously. They were dragged to the office by the head of the department, and I heard even he was speechless. Honestly, this whole thing is just pure comedy gold. Ryan really lives up to the nickname Narcissus. I swear, it's like he's a walking soap opera. I couldn't help but laugh. The Ryan I had known in my previous life had always been cold and reserved around me, his behavior calculated and distant. The only time he ever acted on impulse was when he tried to get intimate before finals. Now, watching him parade around with Emily as if they were the school's power couple, I felt nothing but relief. By the end of the day, the two were finally released from the teacher's office. As they walked out, the entire hallway craned their necks to watch. To everyone's surprise, Ryan and Emily exited hand in hand, posing as if they were celebrities on a red carpet. They waved at the surrounding students, smiling as if expecting applause. Are these two idiots? Someone muttered nearby. Do they seriously think they're cool? I chuckled quietly to myself. Let's see how this circus act ends. I thought. From now on, they're just my entertainment. Completely oblivious to how ridiculous they looked. Ryan and Emily continued their charade. When they passed by me, Ryan tightened his hold on Emily and smirked triumphantly. Do you regret it now? He asked, flipping his hair like some over-the-top anime villain. If you just said yes, it would have been you enjoying all of my love right now. I took a step back, pretending to avoid catching whatever disease he was exuding. No thanks. I wish you two a long and happy life together. May you have lots of kids. Maybe 8 or 9. Emily clung to Ryan's arm, giving me a saccharine smile full of false sweetness. There's no need for such blessings, she said with a coy tilt of her head. You're just jealous that I've won Ryan's love, Emily said smugly. But even if you regret it now, it's too late. As if to make a statement, she grabbed Ryan's hand and kissed him right in front of me. The exaggerated sound of the kiss echoed, and when they pulled apart, the sight of the lingering string of saliva made my stomach churn. Around us, horrified gasps erupted from the students. Oh my God! My eyes! My poor eyes! Someone groaned dramatically. Stop, please, for the love of everything. Just stop. Another cried out. But Ryan and Emily clearly interpreted the outbursts as the cries of envious single people being defeated by true love. They walked away triumphantly, leaving me standing there. The truth was, I wasn't trembling from heartbreak. I was cringing so hard my toes were curling into the ground. I half joked to myself that if they kept this up, I wouldn't need to buy a house in the future. I'd have built a fortress with the sheer power of second-hand embarrassment. My classmates shot me looks of pity and curiosity. One of them finally spoke up. You seriously grew up with someone like him? Childhood friends? Really? I immediately shook my head. Absolutely not. We just lived in the same orphanage. That's all. My seatmate gave me a skeptical look. But before, weren't you? I cut them off with a glare. Don't ask. If you keep asking, then you can be his childhood friend. They wisely dropped the subject. Later that day, during the break between classes, Ryan showed up to deliver a bouquet of flowers to Emily. As they walked through the hallway, arm in arm, students passed by with expressions ranging from mild amusement to outright disdain. Emily, of course, misinterpreted every glance as admiration, holding her head high like a proud swan as she accepted the bouquet. They hugged right there in front of everyone, completely oblivious to the teacher walking by. The teacher's brows furrowed in disgust, but it was clear no one wanted to bother reprimanding them anymore. Ryan and Emily seemed to think this was a sign of approval and flaunted their love even more aggressively after that. Later, as I was heading to the library with a stack of books, I turned a corner and almost walked straight into the two of them. They were walking toward me in an awkwardly intertwined pose. Ryan's arm wrapped around Emily's waist while she clung tightly to his hand. The sight was so ridiculous I couldn't help but burst out laughing. Ryan noticed my reaction and, mistaking it for something else, straightened up with an air of superiority. He strutted over to me, his gaze sweeping disdainfully over the books in my arms. I told you, you're such a nerd. He sneered. What's the point of studying so hard? In the end, you'll still have to marry a successful man like me. He let out a cold laugh. This world belongs to men. Women like you should stick to what you're good at. Raising children. Don't bother with these silly ideas of women can hold up half the sky. It's unrealistic. I gave him a sharp, mocking look but deliberately put on a faintly dejected expression. Without saying a word, I turned and walked away. Just standing near him made me worry that his idiocy might be contagious. I didn't have time for this nonsense. I had college entrance exams to prepare for, and couldn't afford to let him drag down my IQ. Behind me, I heard Ryan and Emily burst into laughter, clearly convinced that I still harbored feelings for him. I found it exhausting how they insisted on making me part of their weird little game. Wasn't it enough that they had each other? Why did they have to include me? Later that morning, as I was sorting through some notes, Ryan approached me. For once, he wasn't glued to Emily's side. He grabbed my arm with an air of mystery and tried to pull me aside. Our classmates, ever curious, immediately crowded around the door to eavesdrop. My seatmate, clearly delighted at the potential for drama. Slipped a recording pen into my pocket. I spent good money on this. Don't waste it, he whispered with a mischievous grin. Rolling my eyes, I reluctantly followed Ryan out of the classroom. In the hallway, he put on a performance, pretending to be sincere as he reached for my hand. When I raised an eyebrow at him, he awkwardly withdrew, his expression shifting as he spoke in a low, self-righteous tone. I'm giving you another chance, he said. If you apologize to me in front of everyone and admit that you like me, I'll assume you only rejected me that day because you were shy. I'll forgive you and even give you another opportunity. I'll break things off with Emily. I snorted, rubbing my temples as the loud murmurs of our classmates floated out from the classroom. Aren't you worried about Emily getting upset if she hears you talking like this? Her family has money. After all, she's set to inherit her family's company after graduation. Ryan hesitated for a moment, a flicker of doubt crossing his face. But just as quickly, his expression softened into a look of misplaced gratitude. I knew it. I knew you still cared about me. You're even thinking about my future. His voice turned earnest. Don't worry. I'll handle everything. He paused, then added, even if I can't give you an official title, I promise you can be my mistress. Just apologize and admit you like me, and I'll treat both of you equally. In fact, I might even treat you better since, well, I can't give you the public recognition you deserve. From behind us came the unmistakable sound of someone gagging. I could feel the heat rising to my face, not from embarrassment but from the sheer absurdity of his words. If this conversation went on any longer, I was going to become the permanent subject of every class reunion joke. I quickly interrupted him. Forget it. Let's end this here. You and Emily can be together forever for all I care. I hurried back to the classroom, bracing myself for the inevitable teasing. Sure enough, my classmates wasted no time, their voices dripping with sarcasm as they mimicked Ryan's ridiculous proclamations. Isn't that our dear Narcissus little mistress? One of them drawled, spreading their arms dramatically. I love you both equally. My face burned as I sighed deeply. Cut it out already. He's driving me insane. Several of the boys nodded in agreement, one of them thumping his chest in mock bravado. Don't worry. Next time he shows up, we'll take care of it for you. I thought that might be the end of it. But, of course, I underestimated Emily. That afternoon, she showed up at my desk, looking every bit as insufferable as usual. My seatmate, resigned to the inevitable, sighed and slipped another recording pen into my pocket with a wink. With a weary sigh, I walked out to meet Emily, already exhausted by the thought of dealing with her. She stood there, head held high, looking down at me like a queen addressing her subject. Before she could launch into whatever speech she had prepared, I pulled the recording pen from my pocket and pressed play. Her face didn't change in the slightest as she listened. In fact, when it ended, she looked even more pleased with herself. Her cheeks flushed with pride as her gaze swept over me disdainfully. I really don't know what Ryan sees in someone like you, she said, her tone dripping with condescension. Flat chest. No curves. It's almost pitiful. I clenched my jaw, resisting the urge to lash out. But she wasn't done. Oh, I guess you didn't know, did you? Ryan and I have already given each other our firsts. Her voice was filled with smug satisfaction. You don't stand a chance now. I'm his first woman and the only one he'll ever need. I'm his salvation. Her smile widened. Oh, and even if he were with you, you'd just be his mistress. He told me so himself. You'd be nothing more than one of my lackeys. I stared at her, stunned into silence. The recording hadn't fazed her at all. Instead, she doubled down, flaunting her delusions with even greater enthusiasm. It was like the end of the Qing dynasty had come and gone. Yet this remnant of chaos had somehow refused to fade away. Emily mistook my stunned expression for regret. See? This is what happens when you don't cherish him. I took him away. And now you're miserable. Aren't you? Her eyes sparkled with triumph, as if my supposed heartbreak validated everything she'd done. But she was disappointed. All she could see in my expression was an overwhelming awkwardness. I was dying inside from secondhand embarrassment, my entire body shivering at the sheer absurdity of the situation. I wanted nothing more than to call the police and have them both taken away for public nuisance. fighting off a wave of revulsion. I shook myself, trying to dispel the chills running down my spine. At this point, my only thought was, can these two idiots please stay as far away from me as possible? I rolled my eyes dramatically. Please, leave me alone. Ryan, I just want to focus on my studies. I'm begging you. Let me be. Feeling utterly defeated, like a dog with its tail between its legs, I dragged myself back to the classroom. When I told my classmates what had happened, their teasing demeanor shifted to something more complex. They glanced outside, watching Emily saunter off with a smug smile, a mix of confusion and pity crossing their faces. After a long pause, my seatmate sighed. Doesn't she come from a pretty well-off family? Why does she act like she's starved for love? I nodded in agreement. Despite their taunts earlier, Emily and Ryan didn't stop pestering me. If it wasn't today, then tomorrow they'd find another reason to flaunt their so-called love, boasting about dates or whatever nonsense they were up to. Meanwhile, I poured all my energy into studying. For someone like me, the college entrance exams were my only way out, my sole path to success. Only fools like Ryan thought they could change their fate by leeching off others. I wasn't especially intelligent, but I was determined and relentless. Time passed in the blink of an eye, and soon, high school was over. Sitting in an internet cafe, my hands trembled as I checked my exam results. The number on the screen, 703, blurred before my teary eyes. I immediately shared the news with my homeroom teacher and a few close classmates. Their responses were sincere and congratulatory. On graduation day, we created a class group chat. My seatmate, for reasons beyond comprehension, added Ryan to the group, claiming, "We're all classmates." After all, of course, I knew the real reason. He just wanted front row seats to any drama. Not surprisingly, Ryan dragged Emily into the group, and the two flooded the chat with over 70 photos, including cringe-worthy morning selfies. Publicly, we congratulated them. Privately, smaller group chats lit up with snarky commentary. As people began sharing their exam scores, nearly everyone felt a sense of accomplishment, except for two individuals. Curious classmates tagged Ryan and Emily, asking about their results. After all, Emily, while not a top student, had consistently ranked in the top 100, and Ryan, thanks to my previous tutoring, was expected to at least break into the top 20, though they'd skipped the last few mock exams. No one thought they'd outright skip the college entrance exams, but neither of them responded. The silence was deafening. Then, someone dropped a bombshell in the chat. A photo of Emily, pale and clutching her stomach, surrounded by concerned adults, while Ryan, his face bruised and swollen, sat slumped nearby. Chaos erupted in the group. After some digging, a few classmates with family connections pieced together the story. Apparently, neither Emily nor Ryan had taken the exams. They'd left school early because Emily was pregnant. Initially, they had planned to keep it a secret and terminate the pregnancy. But before they could, Emily's father found out. The Carter family caught the two red-handed in a hotel room, tangled up in each other, still half-dressed. In the aftermath, Emily had a miscarriage from the stress, and Ryan was beaten so badly he ended up with severe injuries, including a concussion that landed him in the ICU. Reading this, my forehead throbbed with disbelief. Ever since my rebirth, so many things had veered off course. Just as I was processing the news, someone in the group suggested visiting them in the hospital. After all, we were classmates. They reasoned. I squinted at the screen. Of course, the instigator was none other than my seatmate, who sent me a cheeky dog meme. I responded with an exaggerated eye roll emoji, but he wasn't done. He sent a voice message, his tone dripping with mischief. "Come on, don't you want to see the aftermath with your own eyes?" His words struck a nerve. Of course, I wanted to see Ryan's sorry state. How could I not? A few of us agreed to meet at the hospital, but as soon as we stepped into Ryan's hospital room, the unexpected happened. He woke up. The moment his eyes landed on me, they lit up with an intensity I'd never seen before. "Sarah? Is that you? Sarah, I missed you so much." His voice cracked with emotion as he struggled to sit up, only to collapse back onto the bed, groaning in pain. Looking down at his injured body, then back at the people in the room, his expression grew dazed and confused. A sinking feeling crept over me. My brow furrowed. Don't tell me. Did he also get reborn? To test my suspicion, I shot him a look of pure disdain. Why are you calling me? Isn't your wife still recovering in another room after her miscarriage? His face twisted in shock. Wife? What wife? The only person I've ever loved is you. The room filled with the sound of my classmates' scoffs and murmurs of disgust. I felt the same way, shuddering internally at his words, muttering, "Disgusting." I turned and left without a backward glance. But the worst was yet to come. From that day on, Ryan clung to me like a leech, refusing to let go. At the place where I worked part-time, Ryan started waiting for me along the route to and from work. His constant presence wore on my nerves until I finally couldn't take it anymore. I stopped in my tracks and confronted him. "What do you want from me?" To my shock, he immediately dropped to his knees with a loud thud and crawled forward a few steps. He looked up at me with a desperate, pleading expression. "I already know what happened in our past life. I know you've been reborn, just like me. Can we start over this time? Please. I really love you. I swear. Last time I was just fooled by Emily. The truth is, you're the only one I've ever loved." As he spoke, his face lit up with anticipation. "Didn't you say before that you liked me the most? Back when we were in the orphanage. Remember? I always gave you the snacks I hid for myself." I couldn't stop myself from sneering. "And what about the things you said to Emily back then?" His eyes gleamed with hope. "That was only because I love you. I couldn't stand how cold you were toward me. I was using her to make you jealous. And besides," he added with an air of self-righteousness, "you scored so well on your exams this time because I dragged Emily down. Isn't that right?" The sheer audacity of his statement left me speechless. His tone was so smug, almost as if he believed he deserved credit for my success. My dislike for him deepened, solidifying into something unshakable. "You think my score was thanks to you?" I said, voice dripping with mockery. "Let me tell you, if it weren't for you and Emily jumping around in front of me like clowns every day, I could have done even better. Now, leave me alone." Without giving him a chance to respond, I turned on my heel and walked to the security booth at my apartment complex. "This man keeps harassing me," I told the guards. "If he shows up again, please call the police." Ryan's expression twisted with rage. He lunged forward, shouting, "You can't treat me like this. You're supposed to love me. How can you not love me? You even died for me in our last life. How can you be so heartless now?" His words didn't stir even the slightest emotion in me. The security guards, however, didn't hesitate. They held him back, clearly annoyed, and shooed him away, grumbling that he seemed mentally unstable. Under their watchful eyes, Ryan had no choice but to leave. I later heard he tried a few more times to bother me, but the guard's threat to involve the police eventually made him give up. I didn't see him again for 6 years. By then, I had graduated from university and started my own business. One evening, I was attending a banquet, mingling with other attendees and sharing light-hearted conversations, when a sudden commotion broke out nearby. Curious, I turned my head and saw 2 people entering the venue. One of my business partners nudged my shoulder and leaned in to whisper, "Do you know who those 2 are? They're infamous." Without waiting for my reply, he continued, "That's Emily Carter. She used to be a decent student, but ever since she got involved with that Ryan guy, her life's been a mess. She's been madly in love with him for years, going so far as to have multiple abortions because of him. Recently, she fell down the stairs and lost the ability to have children altogether." He smirked as he spoke, his tone dripping with disdain. "And that Ryan guy? Apparently, he's always been hung up on someone else. He didn't want to take responsibility for any of it. But Emily's family threatened to press charges if he didn't marry her. So, he finally gave in. What a pair of clowns." I turned to look at the pair, surprised by how much things had changed in the years since I'd last seen them. It seemed their relationship hadn't turned out as idyllic as they'd once flaunted. Naturally, they noticed me as well. Emily's eyes lit up when she saw me, and with her usual arrogance, she strutted over, dragging Ryan behind her. "Oh, look who it is," she said with a sneer. "Did you come here as your boss's +1? I see you've been working hard all these years. But for what? At the end of the day, you're still working for people like me. Wealthy people. Her gaze raked over me, her expression full of condescension. She clung to Ryan's arm as if to rub it in, then added, "You got into a prestigious university. But what's the point? You're still just a worker under someone with a high school diploma like me. And now, you're here hoping I'll grant you a business deal." The disdain in her voice was palpable. The assistant standing beside Emily was already on the verge of fainting, frantically gripping her hand to stop her from speaking further. Their pleading gaze turned toward Ryan, silently begging for help, but Ryan's eyes were fixed on me, full of resentment, as if blaming me for completely ruining his life. That moment, the host of the banquet finally appeared. He nodded in my direction, and I returned a polite smile, startled by my acknowledgement. He hurried onto the stage and began his speech, his eyes repeatedly darting toward me. After all, the only reason he had organized this event was to secure a partnership with my company. Meanwhile, Emily slid into the front row, gazing at him with reverence. Then, she turned back to me with a sneer. "See that? That's the most important business partner of our family. Only wealthy people like us can work with someone like him. People like you will never have that kind of opportunity." Ryan, on the other hand, sidled up to me and lowered his voice. "I've already gained control of most of the Carter family's assets," he whispered. "If you just humble yourself and admit you still like me, I can give you a special deal." His lips curled into a sleazy grin. "Just spend one night with me, and I'll give you a chance to collaborate. The rest depends on how well you perform." I stared at him, disgusted beyond words. How had I ever been blind and deaf enough in my past life to like someone as vile as him? Just then, the speech on stage ended, and the chairman quickly descended from the platform. Emily immediately assumed he was heading toward her, her face lighting up as she approached him with a smile. "Chairman, I'm Emily," she began, but her voice faltered as she watched, stunned, while the man she idolized bypassed her completely and walked straight toward me. With a warm smile, the chairman extended his hand to me. "Miss Lawrence, having you here personally is an honor that truly elevates our humble event." Both Emily and Ryan froze, their faces plastered with shock and disbelief. The chairman turned to the crowd and introduced me. "This is Miss Sarah Lawrence, the largest supplier of raw materials to our company and our second largest shareholder. We have a 3-year collaboration plan in the works." Emily's and Ryan's expressions shifted multiple times as they struggled to process what they were hearing. Ryan, clearly more adaptable than I expected, quickly stepped forward with a charming smile. "Miss Lawrence, we know each other. We were high school classmates." Emily also rushed forward, her face twisted into a bizarre mixture of desperation and forced humility. Yes, we went to school together," she added, grinning nervously at me. Ryan's earlier arrogance had completely vanished, replaced by a fawning expression. "Miss Lawrence and I go way back. We grew up together. We were childhood friends," he said, trying to inject warmth into his tone. I raised my hand, cutting him off mid-sentence. He opened his mouth to say more, but the sharp glare from the chairman immediately silenced him. Smiling slightly, I addressed the chairman. "Isn't this banquet meant to celebrate the success of our partnership? Could we please have these irrelevant individuals escorted out? I don't like them." The chairman's expression darkened as he cast a cold look at Ryan and Emily. He signaled to his assistants, who quickly summoned security. Moments later, several guards arrived and escorted the pair out of the venue. Even as they were dragged away, their desperate pleas echoed through the hall. "Miss Lawrence, please, give us another chance. Don't cancel the partnership. Without it, we're finished. Please, we were wrong." Their voices faded into the distance, leaving a heavy silence in their wake. I glanced around at the attendees, noting the wary looks directed at me. Smiling calmly, I raised my glass. "Let's not let irrelevant matters disrupt the atmosphere. A toast to our successful partnership and a bright future ahead." Relieved, the chairman eagerly raised his glass as well. "To our future collaboration." The shadows of my past were gone. From this moment forward, my future was wide open, filled with endless possibilities. In my past life, I was trapped in a raging fire, collapsing amidst the flames. My husband, Ethan, and my son, Lucas, didn't just refuse to save me. They even shut the escape window. As I lay on the brink of death, barely breathing, Ethan, the man I had loved for so many years, sneered. Bet you didn't expect the fire was set by you. I'm sick of being called a freeloader, he continued, his tone dripping with contempt. But wasn't it him who begged my father for our marriage in the first place? Lucas, my son, spat on me and said, "You're not my mom. I don't need a mom who meddles in everything. My real mom treats me so much better than you ever did." All I had done was try to teach him basic morals and how to be a decent human being. When I opened my eyes again, I found myself 3 months after giving birth. This time, things were going to change. It all began when my mother-in-law, Mary, lost the baby. Yes, lost. That was when I decided to rewrite my life. How could the baby just disappear? Ethan shouted in panic, pacing the living room as he confronted Mary. I only turned around for a moment. How was I supposed to know? She stammered, trying to come up with an excuse. Lying on the bed, broke down in tears and choked out. I remember feeding the baby earlier, and then putting him in the cradle before going upstairs to rest. But now, my voice trembled, consumed by grief. Mary had taken the baby to a card room, a 3-month-old infant, lost while she was playing cards in a smoke-filled, chaotic environment. Ethan's face darkened with anger. Mom, you brought the baby to a card room? What were you thinking? She, however, wasn't fazed by his anger, feigning remorse. She replied, I know, it was wrong of me, but you know how forgetful I am at my age. I knew her too well. She wasn't sorry at all, just putting on a show. Ethan, pretending to be the caring husband, turned to me and said gently, Don't argue with Mom. Okay, she didn't mean for this to happen. You need to rest. You're still recovering. My heart turned cold as I watched the facade. His concern was nothing but a calculated act to keep me compliant. Reluctantly, I nodded, saying softly, Don't argue with Mom. Ethan, she didn't mean it. And it's my fault for falling asleep. He sighed heavily. No, it's not your fault. You're still recovering from childbirth. Turning back to Mary, he added sternly, No more playing cards. Got it? Of course. She replied. But I knew better. Despite coming to help with the baby, Mary spent her days playing cards. Meals were cooked by the housekeeper. Laundry was done by someone else. And even preparing formula was beyond her efforts. Her only contribution was holding the baby when Ethan came home, putting on a show of affection. I should have seen through their act long ago. Let's focus on finding the baby, Ethan said eventually. I agreed to join them in the search. But as I tried to get out of bed, I collapsed back onto it. My body was too weak, and I coughed violently, feeling like my chest might split apart. Ethan quickly changed his mind, telling me to rest while they searched. The rain poured outside in heavy sheets. But this time, I didn't follow them into the storm. I wouldn't risk my health for people who had already shown their true colors. Lucas, I whispered bitterly to myself, if you're gone, then stay gone. Don't expect to come back and leech off me again. I vowed to find my real child, alive or dead. Wrapping myself tightly in my blanket, I finally slept soundly for the first time in years. The next day, Ethan and Mary returned, heads hanging low, unsuccessful in their search. I put on a performance of grief, sobbing until I nearly fainted. My parents arrived shortly after and unleashed their fury on Ethan. My mother, sharp-tongued and relentless, humiliated Mary to the point where she couldn't lift her head. Ethan, who relied on my father's connections to advance his career, stood silently under their scorn. I had suffered through a life-threatening delivery, hemorrhaging severely while Ethan and Mary argued outside the operating room. Ethan wanted a natural birth, claiming it would make the baby smarter, while Mary hesitated due to the risks. If my father hadn't rushed from a meeting in time to sign the consent forms for a C-section, I might not have survived. After enduring stretch marks, postpartum recovery, and sleepless nights caring for the baby, I now knew the child I had nurtured wasn't even mine. And Ethan, the man who once seemed gentle and considerate, had finally revealed the full extent of his cruelty. I glanced at the baby photos on the wall. Who would have thought that the child in those innocent pictures would grow up to be a monster? The boy didn't resemble me at all. His thick lips and prominent ears were all too similar to Ethan. But no one ever doubted that he was my biological child. After all, people always question whether the father is truly the father, not whether the mother is truly the mother. My mother's face turned pale with shock. This must be Ethan's doing. Whose child is this? I'm going to confront him. Mom, don't, I said, pausing before calmly laying out my plan in detail. In both my past and present lives, my parents have always been my rock, my safe harbor. My father, with his years of experience in the business world, had a sharp eye for seeing through people's true intentions. You're right, he said after hearing me out. We'll secretly search for your child without making any noise about it. My mother finally calmed down, though tears streamed down her face as she held me tightly. My poor daughter, you've suffered so much. Whatever you want to do, your father and I will support you. Ethan, that despicable liar, put on an Oscar-worthy performance. My parents fell for it, giving him their full trust and support. Meanwhile, I was working in silence, determined to find the truth. A week after Lucas went missing, we filed a police report and put up missing person notices. Ethan did everything he was supposed to, but I had ulterior motives. Outwardly, I was searching for Lucas, but in truth, I was looking for my biological child. In the process, I even accidentally uncovered a human trafficking ring, helping the police bust the operation. One day, as I returned home, I saw Ethan from a distance, pulling and tugging at the arm of a woman in a dress. She eventually collapsed into his arms, sobbing uncontrollably. So, it's her, I thought bitterly. Her name was Moira. I remembered her from when Lucas was 3 years old. She ran a small convenience store in our neighborhood. Lucas used to cry and beg Ethan to take him there to play on the ride on cars outside the shop. Sometimes, Moira would even give Lucas snacks and treats. Back then, I thought she was just a kind store owner. Looking back now, I wanted to slap myself for being so naive. Hiding behind a large tree, I took photos of the entire scene with my camera. I was a lawyer. I knew how to strike where it hurt the most. My father, following my plan, had already made his move. Ethan was denied his promotion, with the excuse that he lacked sufficient qualifications. Ethan came home that evening visibly irritated, though he hid it well. For the first time, he voluntarily donned an apron and prepared dinner, a lavish spread of 3 dishes and a soup. I'm sorry, Mandy, he said, trying to sound sincere. I didn't get the promotion. Maybe you could talk to your dad again? I've been working so hard. Even my mother-in-law, Mary, joined in. Rare for her. She forced a smile and said, "That's so unfair, isn't it? Ethan works so hard. He deserves it." I wiped away fake tears and said coldly, "What promotion? The child we're looking for hasn't even been found yet." Both of them froze. Tears began streaming down my face, heavy and unstoppable. This is the child I risked my life to bring into this world. If we don't find him, I'll fight you both to the end. Mary sighed theatrically. Mandy, I'm not saying this to upset you, but you're still young. You and Ethan can have another child. I snapped. Have another child? You. I shot back at her, my tone sharp and unyielding. Ethan's face darkened. Mandy, don't talk to Mom like that. She's only trying to help. The child is gone. We can't change that now. What's important is that we don't lose hope. How dare you? I shouted, my voice trembling with fury. All you care about is your promotion and your salary. Does the life or death of our child mean nothing to you? Is it because he's not yours that you can brush this off so easily? I became increasingly agitated, finally flipping the dining table in a fit of rage. Plates and bowls crashed to the floor, soup splashing onto both of them. With tears streaming down my face and my voice hoarse, I pointed at them. Even if he's dead, I want to see his body. Do you hear me? Mandy, calm down. Lower your voice, Ethan said, glancing nervously toward the upstairs neighbors. I threw open the window and shouted at the top of my lungs, my voice echoing through the neighborhood. Where are you? My baby? Mommy misses you so much. Mary tugged at Ethan's sleeve and whispered, She's gone mad. Completely mad. Perhaps I had. I started wandering the neighborhood in my pajamas, telling everyone I met that my mother-in-law lost the baby while playing cards. The neighborhood women pointed fingers at Mary, gossiping about her carelessness. At Ethan's workplace, I showed up in formal attire to request leave on his behalf, saying he needed time to search for his missing child. When his boss hesitated, I threw a fit right there in the office, refusing to leave until they agreed. He understood me, though his colleagues were curious. I laid out all the mess happening at home, sparing no details. Ethan's face flushed red as he stammered awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable. As for me, I didn't care anymore. After all, I had already lived through one lifetime. Our family was a disaster, a complete train wreck. The only person whose dignity took a hit was my father. Every few days, someone would drop by our home just to gossip about the spectacle. Eventually, Ethan applied for a transfer to a different position, one that seemed laid back but clearly signaled to others that he'd been affected by everything happening at home. On top of that, a new boss had just taken over at his workplace. The new broom sweeps clean philosophy kicked in, and everyone was scrambling to secure their positions. Ethan, always one to gauge the winds, began currying favor with other managers and subtly distancing himself from my father. It was on a random afternoon when I staged my big move. I climbed to the rooftop, sobbing and screaming, threatening to jump. Ethan was below, crying loudly, shouting, "Mandy, Mandy, come down, please." But I knew him too well. He wasn't afraid I'd jump. He was afraid I'd ruin his future at such a critical moment. I wailed and screamed, teetering on the edge, my threats of jumping sending Ethan and Mary into a panic. Their faces shifted between pale and flushed. Mary, shaken to her core, clung to Ethan, crying out at the top of her lungs, "Ethan, she's crazy, absolutely crazy. Today, she's threatening to jump tomorrow. She might grab a knife and come after you. What will we do if she ruins your life? Divorce her. Divorce her now. It's the only way." The wind on the rooftop blew my hair wildly, carrying with it a strange sense of freedom and detachment. Divorce. They finally said it. That's exactly what I wanted. I had been keeping tabs on Ethan and Moira for weeks, documenting everything with my camera. My resolve was like steel, unyielding. Divorce was just the first step. I wouldn't let them have an easy life. Ethan hesitated, glancing at me. Mary seized the moment to fan the flames. "Your father-in-law can't help you anymore," she said, her voice lowering. "And Mandy, look at her. Do you want to spend the rest of your life taking care of her? She's unstable. Remember what the doctor said? After this pregnancy, her body is damaged. It'll be difficult for her to have more children. The Lee family needs a future. Ethan, you can still have children. Why not marry Moira? She's obedient and easy to manage. Not like Mandy with her manager father thinking she's untouchable. Besides, her family may not be rich, but she's more than enough for us to handle. And your father-in-law didn't even help you with your promotion this time. Can you really count on him in the future?" Mary's words struck a nerve with Ethan. Between my parents' deliberate coldness toward him and Mary's incessant manipulation, Ethan finally became disillusioned and agreed to divorce me. The process was swift. Mary and Ethan feared I might do something drastic, so they didn't put up much of a fight. The division of assets was quick too. We had only been married for 2 years and hadn't accumulated much together. My father, ever the shrewd businessman, had insisted before the wedding that we live in a property he owned, a house slated for demolition, and made sure it was protected by a prenuptial agreement. The dowry and bride price had been a meager $2,000 each, which was one reason why Ethan and Mary had always resented my father, believing him to be stingy. On the day I received the divorce certificate, my demeanor shifted entirely. I coldly ordered Ethan and Mary to pack up and leave the house. "You have 2 days to move out and vacate this place," I said firmly. Mary's face turned pale. "Why should I move?" she snapped. "This was the marital home gifted to my son." I smiled mockingly. "Have you forgotten whose name is on the deed? You've been squatting in my house for so long that you've deluded yourself into thinking it's yours. When you married into this family, the Lee family only brought $2,000 to the table. Unless you want to hash this out in court, I suggest you start packing. Or have you forgotten what I do for a living? I'm a lawyer." Mary's chest heaved with fury, but she had no retort. All she could do was resort to insults, shouting, "You shameless wretch. You think anyone will want a crazy woman like you? You'll end up as a spinster, dying alone in this house. Her words didn't faze me. I had already won the first battle. I ignored her completely. 2 days. That's all you get, I said coldly before slamming the door and walking out. The next day, the real estate agent called me and said, Ethan and Mary were sitting in the living room bawling their eyes out. They flat out refused to leave, saying all sorts of things, insulting you, your parents, and even cursing your entire family lineage. It got so bad the police had to come and sort it out. After a lot of back and forth, we finally managed to get them out. I've cleared the house, taken the keys, and it's all sorted now. He paused before adding, Your ex-husband, honestly, I don't know how to describe him. You're lucky to be out of that family. You've got a bright future ahead. Thank you for handling everything. Make sure you take an extra commission for your trouble, I replied. After hanging up, I returned to my office at the hospital. Sitting across from me was the hospital director. Next to him was Officer Lee. I filed an official report against Lisa, Ethan's cousin, who had been the doctor during my delivery. Lisa stole my child, I said bluntly. I've reported the matter to the police. Officer Lee is here to assist with the investigation, and will need the hospital's full cooperation. I couldn't believe Ethan didn't know anything about this. Lisa was family, and her involvement was no coincidence. As the investigation unfolded, Ethan and Mary spread rumors about me, claiming I had gone insane after losing the baby. They told anyone who would listen that I was unrecognizable, neither human nor ghost, and that I had destroyed the family. They even accused me of having an affair, saying my threats to jump off a building were all part of a plan to push for divorce. Ethan painted himself as the victim of a deranged woman, tirelessly working to hold the family together while I spiraled out of control. It was the kind of narrative people love. An overworked, dutiful husband pitted against his unhinged, selfish wife. The public, of course, ate it up. But I was ready for this. I had compiled a collection of photos of Ethan and Moira together, intimate moments that left no room for misinterpretation. I emailed the photos to his company and every relative we shared. The tide of public opinion shifted instantly. Suddenly, everyone was at my father's doorstep. Mr. White, your former son-in-law was cheating all along, wasn't he? There's even talk he had a girlfriend back in the countryside before he dumped her to marry your daughter. Did you know about this? He acted so humble before you, serving tea and playing the perfect son-in-law. But now it's clear he was just putting on a show. My father, usually calm and composed, was blindsided. The constant questions and gossip wore on him. His hair seemed grayer, his demeanor more exhausted, as if he'd aged a decade overnight. To make matters worse, whispers spread about Lucas. People speculated Mary had intentionally abandoned him, claiming she dumped him in a trash heap where a stray dog might have carried him off. Poor child, they said. Born into the wrong family. That old woman is heartless. And Ethan? Just as bad. A family like that is a curse waiting to happen. When Ethan distanced himself from my father after the new boss arrived, many took it as a sign of his true character. He's nothing but an opportunist, they said. Thank God Mandy got out before it was too late. Public sympathy began to lean in my favor. The story of my struggles spread throughout Ethan's company, even reaching the security guard at the front desk, who handed my father a cigarette and offered his condolences. The senior executives, after speaking with my father, reassigned him to a smaller division where he could quietly work until retirement. Meanwhile, Ethan was subtly forced out. Reputation matters, the HR director told him. And unfortunately, yours is beyond repair. Ethan lost his job, the career he'd been so proud of. His life fell into chaos, and as I had expected, he eventually turned to me, desperate and shameless. I had anticipated this from the start. That's why I had insisted on the divorce first, knowing the Lee family's true nature. Selfish, greedy, and opportunistic. Without the legal ties of marriage, I was free to move on with my life. I could go as far as I wanted, do whatever I wanted, without worrying about them dragging me back. Now, Ethan showed up at my door every few days, bearing gifts like supplements or fruit, apologizing profusely. Today, to my surprise, he brought Mary along. Look, Mandy, I know I was wrong. He stammered. Please give us another chance. I know I was wrong. Please forgive me. Ethan begged, his voice trembling. Come back home. Mandy, please. Ever since the divorce, I haven't been able to eat or sleep. I've been miserable. I was wrong. I deserve to die for what I did. I promise I'll never make the same mistake again. It was her fault. Moira seduced me. I've already cut ties with her, but she keeps coming back to bother me. I swear, I'll do anything you want if you just come home. Mary, who had been watching her precious son grovel, couldn't bear to stand idly by. She chimed in with a sigh. That's right. Mandy, Ethan made a mistake. But all men make mistakes. Forgive him this once. For the sake of the family. As for the child, I'll personally apologize for everything. Please, come back. I cut them off coldly, my laugh dripping with disdain. Who are you calling your wife? Ethan, the divorce was your idea. You signed the papers yourself. What's with this barking now? Before they could respond, I raised my leg and kicked Ethan hard, sending him sprawling to the floor. Mary's face turned ashen. What are you doing? How dare you hit him? You have no manners at all. Ethan lay on the ground, groaning in pain, struggling to get up. Yet, even in that moment, his instinct was to hold Mary back, trying to pacify her. Don't get worked up. Mom. I crouched down slightly, staring at him as he scrambled weakly to his feet. My voice was cold, unrelenting. Where is my child? Where did you dump him? He froze, his expression blank. What are you talking about? Don't play dumb. I said sharply. The baby I gave birth to. Where is he? Ethan's face twisted in shock, while Mary's turned ghostly pale. She stammered. How do you know? I laughed bitterly. Oh, I know everything. I also know that the switch happened in the delivery room. They both looked as if they'd been struck by lightning, their disbelief palpable. So you've known all along, Ethan muttered, collapsing back onto the floor. You pretended to be crazy just to get the divorce? He let out a broken laugh, tears streaming down his face. Mary, regaining her composure, erupted with fury. What about my precious grandson? What did you do to him? Did you harm him? You must have. You vile woman. You've got a black heart. Give me back my grandson. You witch. She hurled insult after insult, her voice shrill and grating. I glared at her, disgusted by her theatrics. Don't you dare throw your filth at me. Get out of my sight. I slammed the door shut, cutting off their pathetic cries. Through the door, I overheard them answering a phone call. Police? What? I didn't throw away the child. She's lying. Mary's panicked voice rang out. Ethan tried to shush her, but the damage was done. It seemed the police had found something. With the hospital cooperating, they had pried the truth out of Lisa, the doctor who had assisted with my delivery. Ethan and Mary were both taken in for questioning, and the full story unraveled quickly. Ethan had been the only university graduate from his village, earning his way into my father's company after navigating the fiercely competitive job market. He was capable and ambitious but also cunning. To secure a better future, he broke off his engagement with Moira and pursued me instead. We got married, and for a while, everything seemed fine. But 6 months into our marriage, Ethan and Moira crossed paths again. Their affair reignited, and it wasn't long before Moira became pregnant. By then, I was also pregnant. Moira gave birth prematurely a week before my due date. Her baby, born too early, was placed in the hospital's neonatal care unit, racking up medical bills she couldn't afford. Desperate, she threatened Ethan, demanding he divorce me and give her money. If he refused, she vowed to expose everything. Ethan, unwilling to give up his newfound success and the privileges that came with being tied to my family, concocted a plan. Using his silver tongue, he convinced Moira that he would care for her baby as his own. Then, with Mary and Lisa's help, they swapped Lucas for my biological child. It didn't matter to them whether I gave birth to a boy or a girl. As long as the child was part of the Lee bloodline, it was good enough for them. On the day I gave birth, Ethan and Mary staged a fight outside the delivery room, deliberately delaying signing the consent forms. The pain was unbearable, and I hemorrhaged badly. By the time I passed out, I had no idea that the husband I thought I loved had been scheming all along. After the birth, my parents stayed by my side in the hospital room, heartbroken over my condition. They didn't even think to check on the baby. With the chaos in the maternity ward, the lack of surveillance, and Lisa, the doctor, bribing the nurses, everything fell into place for them to carry out their plan. Lisa, being the doctor in charge, held all the authority, and the staff had no choice but to follow her instructions. That's how they exploited the situation to swap the babies. The police, after detailing the events, paused and asked me hesitantly, "Do you know the baby's gender?" I shook my head. I was unconscious. I didn't even know if it was a boy or a girl. The officer revealed that Lisa had admitted the baby was a girl. A daughter. A daughter. The moment I heard it, I couldn't hold back my tears. My hands trembled as I called my mother. "Mom, it's a girl." I choked out. My mother broke into sobs, crying even harder than I was. She knew all too well how much scorn and bias daughters face in this world. My parents had shielded me from all the storms and struggles of life, but they couldn't protect my daughter from being discarded so cruelly. The story continued. Mary, furious upon hearing the baby was a girl, personally abandoned her in a pile of hay. The thought of it made my blood boil. I clutched my phone tightly, my voice shaking as I told my mother, "Mom, she's still alive." A woman collecting recyclables found her and took her in. Relief washed over me like a tidal wave. Alive. That was all that mattered. She was alive. Today was the day we were going to meet her. I carefully applied my makeup, wanting to look presentable, even though she was still just a child. I didn't want her to see me looking disheveled or unstable. "We'll bring her home and live a good life together," my mother said softly, wrapping her arm around my shoulders. She caught my gaze in the mirror and smiled. "Our little girl is beautiful. And with makeup, so are you." I smiled faintly, but as I applied the final touch of lipstick, my eyes reddened. Since becoming pregnant, I hadn't touched makeup or indulged in anything frivolous. I had sacrificed so much, looking forward to the new life I was bringing into the world. Yet, on the day she was born, we were cruelly separated. If not for this second chance at life, I might never have known the truth, not even in death. "Mom, Dad, I'm so sorry," I whispered. "I've been such a burden to you, even in your old age." Behind me were the packed suitcases. After bringing my daughter home, we were leaving the city for good. As long as we were together, anywhere could be home. My father stopped both my mother and me, his warm smile reassuring. "You two are my everything. Protecting you is my responsibility. Our little girl has suffered enough. From now on, I won't let her go through any more pain." My mother brushed my hair gently. "You'll always be Mommy's precious baby," she said softly. I nodded, tears brimming in my eyes. The recycling station was on the outskirts of the city. It consisted of 2 tin sheds surrounded by piles of discarded items. However, one corner stood out. It was meticulously cleaned, with flowers and greenery planted. An elderly woman was sorting through neatly stacked cardboard boxes nearby. Next to her was a second-hand stroller, and tied to it was a white dog with patches of fur. Inside the stroller was my daughter. She was well cared for. Her skin, once red and raw, had become fair and soft. Her delicate features had started to take shape, and she looked healthy. The dog barked loudly as we approached, its sharp eyes wary of strangers. My daughter, unfazed by the noise, giggled at the dog and waved her tiny arms excitedly. My mother's eyes filled with tears. "She looks just like you," she said, her voice breaking. The elderly woman straightened her back, leaning on her waist for support. "No more collecting today," she shouted. "It's time to put the baby to bed." But when I saw her face, I froze, as though struck by lightning. I had seen this woman before. In my past life, I started a law firm and hired a young intern fresh out of college. She resembled me in many ways and was intelligent, which naturally made her stand out among the staff. Once, during a meeting with a client to discuss antiques, her charm and eloquence impressed them so much that they immediately signed a contract. I saw great potential in her and decided to mentor her personally. She was hardworking, meticulous with clients, and not one to act spoiled or entitled. On top of that, she was an excellent cook, always bringing homemade meals to the office. Her dishes were so enticing that colleagues often joked about wanting to crash at her place for a meal. She'd always reply seriously, "My home isn't in great shape, but you're welcome if you don't mind." One day, I found her crying in the stairwell, thinking she had been mistreated by a client. I stopped to check on her. To my surprise, she confided that her grandmother, the only family she had, was gravely ill and needed to be hospitalized. Her makeup was streaked with tears, and her sorrow was palpable. I couldn't bear to see her like that. Knowing her financial struggles, I gave her a $10,000 bonus under the guise of an incentive and granted her extended leave to take care of her grandmother. Later, in my previous life, I learned that after my death, Ethan and Lucas seized control of my company, even taking the corporate seal. The young intern, along with the other lawyers, tried to resist. They fought tooth and nail. Even as their hair became disheveled and their clothes torn in the scuffle, they stood firm, refusing to back down. Looking back, there were traces of every moment that led to this. In this life, I, Mandy White, have done nothing to wrong anyone. I have lived righteously, and perhaps it was this righteousness that moved the heavens to grant me a second chance. "Mommy, she's here." The elderly woman's kind voice broke my thoughts. She asked for nothing in return except for us to cherish and care for our daughter, whom she had raised on rice porridge after running out of formula. The three of us, my parents and I, knelt on the ground, tears streaming down our faces, thanking the woman for her immense kindness and generosity. My daughter was alive, safe, and well. Ethan, Lisa, and Mary were all in custody, awaiting their sentences. How long they would serve was no longer my concern. I didn't visit them. Instead, I brought my daughter, the elderly woman, and the dog back to our new home, closing that chapter of my life. Once the case was settled, my father reached out to old friends in the prison system to ensure Ethan, Lisa, and Mary received the proper care they deserved. And just like that, the enmity between our family and the Lee family came to a temporary close. We named my daughter Ava White. Ava for the dawning light, symbolizing hope and a bright future ahead. When Ava turned 3, I reopened a law firm, just as I had in my previous life, focusing on commercial litigation. Over time, I expanded to include community legal aid, partnering with neighborhood associations. It was exhausting work but incredibly fulfilling. My father often reminded me, a good lawyer must never grow numb to pain. Only by understanding suffering can you truly empathize with your clients. Balancing the firm and family life, I spent my days running the company while helping my parents and the elderly woman care for Ava. As the years went by, we moved from a modest 3-bedroom apartment to a spacious villa. My father eventually retired, passing on his extensive network to me. Coming home from work one evening, the aroma of dinner greeted me before I even opened the door. My mother and the elderly woman were chatting in the living room, while my father had taken Ava to visit some neighbors. "Mommy, look who's back," my daughter's cheerful voice called out. The moment Ava saw me, she ran toward me with her tiny arms wide open. "Mommy, hug me," she said in her sweet, childish voice. I scooped her up and held her close, feeling a sense of warmth and contentment I had never thought possible. In that moment, I realized what true happiness felt like, grounded and secure. When Ava turned 6, I began teaching her the same principles I had tried to teach Lucas in my previous life: kindness, integrity, and respect for others. With the combined efforts of her teachers and our family, she grew to be a compassionate, patient, and intelligent young girl. Perhaps, deep down, she was inherently kind. On her 10th birthday, I came home late after a long meeting with a client. Exhausted, I stepped through the door only to have Ava rush into my arms. "Mommy, can you close your eyes?" she asked excitedly. "Sure," I said, letting her guide me by the hand. We walked and walked until we stopped at a breezy spot. "Now open your eyes." I opened them to see the night sky blanketed with stars. Ava's radiant smile lit up the darkness as she exclaimed, "Mommy, look, there are so many stars tonight." Her joy was contagious, and in that moment, I couldn't help but smile. Life had come full circle. The past no longer haunted me, and the future was bright, filled with endless possibilities. "Let's watch the stars together," Ava said, her voice filled with wonder. The stars are winking at us. It had been so long since I stopped to look at the stars. That night, holding my daughter close, I broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. Ava, confused but worried, lifted her small hand to wipe away my tears. Her little face puckered in concentration as she kissed my cheek and said seriously, "Mommy, don't cry. Grandma and great-grandma said crying gives you wrinkles." After all these years, it was the first time I truly let go of the past. It wasn't my failure in parenting that caused the pain. Some people are just rotten to the core, carrying destructive traits that ruin everything around them. When Ava turned 15, I attended her parent-teacher meeting. As I left the school, I suddenly heard a voice behind me. "Mom, it's me, Lucas." The voice sent a chill down my spine. Could Lucas have been reborn too? My face hardened, and I continued walking, refusing to acknowledge it. But then someone grabbed my arm. Turning around, I saw Lucas standing there, dressed like a street thug, unkempt, covered in cheap tattoos, and reeking of sweat and grime. His eyes lit up with wild excitement as he cried, "Mom, I finally found you." Tears streamed down his face. "Who are you?" I asked coldly, my voice dripping with disdain. I gave him a once-over, making no effort to hide my disgust. His ragged appearance and the stench of his life on the streets made my stomach churn. Lucas noticed my reaction, and a flicker of resentment crossed his eyes, but he quickly masked it, trying to maintain his pitiful demeanor. His gaze, however, hadn't changed. It was just as familiar as before. So, it was true. Lucas had been reborn. In my previous life, he had flaunted designer clothes and luxury watches. In this life, he had fallen to wearing cheap earrings and surviving as a drifter. I wondered what kind-hearted family had picked him up and raised him, only for him to fixate on me, his fake mother. Once again, a true ingrate to his core. "I'm Lucas, your son. Mom, I missed you so much. Where have you been all these years?" he wailed. "I don't have a son," I replied curtly. Then, after a pause, I added, "To be precise, I had a fake son. He was my ex-husband's child with his mistress, and my ex-mother-in-law lost him." "Are you that child?" Lucas nodded frantically, words spilling out as he recounted his hardships. "They never treated me well. I was always hungry and cold. I've suffered so much, always being compared to other kids. They didn't care about me at all." His greed was palpable, like a predator ready to consume me whole. "But I've only ever seen you as my real mom. You're my only mom. I've been searching for you all these years," he pleaded. I hadn't forgotten how, in my past life, as I lay dying in the fire, he had spat on me. The memory still filled me with disgust. "I don't need a son," I said firmly. "Your father and mother need you. You should go back to them." Lucas's expression darkened. He scowled, full of resentment. "I don't want to go back to them." He must have already tried. I could imagine his horror at discovering that his father, who had once thrived with my family's help in our past life, was now a disgraced ex-convict, sitting at home with no prospects, unable to understand where his life had gone wrong. Lucas now wanted to cling to me, the one person who had managed to stay on the same successful path. But I didn't want him in this life either. Ignoring his pitiful cries, I turned and got into my car. The sight of the BMW logo made him freeze, his greed overwhelming his dignity. He threw himself onto the hood, refusing to move. "Mom, you're all I have in this world. If you don't want me, I'd rather die." His empty threats didn't faze me. I revved the engine, and the sound made him stumble backward in fear. Seeing I was serious, he finally stepped aside, his face pale and full of bitterness as he watched me drive away. The moment I got home, I immediately transferred Ava to a private school with strict security. Lucas showed up a few more times, waiting outside for me, but I paid him no attention. I had no choice but to hire someone to rough him up. That evening, dressed in a clean suit, I happened to pass by Lucas on the street. When he saw me, his face lit up with joy, and his bloodied, beaten body squirmed toward me. "Mom, please don't abandon me," he whimpered. "It's me, Lucas. You used to care about me the most. If you want me to study hard now, I'll do it. I'll listen to you." I crouched down, calmly wiping the blood from the corner of his eye. Go find your father, I said lightly. Convince your birth mother to leave. And then I'll take you back. Really? He thought his tears had moved me, a flicker of hope igniting in his eyes. Really? Why would I lie to you? I replied with a faint smile. Back when Ethan, Mary, and Lisa were sentenced, each served a different length of time, but their lives after prison were equally miserable. The three of them squeezed into a damp basement, with no decent jobs and barely enough to survive, living like rats in the gutters. Lisa, being the only one with any ambition, managed to scrape by, despite losing her medical license. She opened an illegal clinic under the radar. I had reported her several times, but each time the clinic was shut down. She managed to reopen it after bribing the right people. Eventually, she cozied up to someone influential and ran her shady business without interruption for years. Lucas's sudden reappearance stirred up trouble in the Lee family once again. But this time was different. He brought Ethan a piece of news that reignited his long-dead hopes. Is it true? Lucas, did Mandy really say that? Ethan asked, his voice trembling with excitement. It's true, Dad. She said it herself. Mom is doing amazing now. She owns a law firm, drives a BMW, and lives in a villa. And she's not married yet. I checked. She's single. Ethan, tears streaming down his face, nodded as though this confirmed everything he had always believed. I knew it, he said, his voice breaking. I knew she couldn't forget me. She loved me so much back then. The deeper the love, the deeper the hate. He glanced back at Moira, who was squatting beside a washbasin doing laundry. After his release from prison, he had officially married her, and she had stayed by his side ever since. For years, she had cooked, cleaned, and cared for his paralyzed mother without a word of complaint. She was obedient, sensible, and diligent, the perfect unpaid servant. If not for the free labor, Ethan would have kicked her out long ago. But now, with the thought of rekindling things with me, Moira became expendable. Ethan kicked over the washbasin, soaking her with dirty water. We're getting a divorce, he declared coldly. Lucas, who still carried his past life affection for Moira, adored her with all his heart. He would have given her the best of everything if he could. But there was one thing he couldn't give her: education, wealth, or status. Reborn with a new understanding of these things' importance, Lucas crouched down and coaxed her softly. Mom, you and Dad have no reason to stay together anymore. It's pointless. You can't maximize your benefits this way. Don't worry. I'll take care of you when you're old. You're my real mom, and I'll never abandon you. For Moira, this was the final straw. She saw them for who they truly were: a selfish father and an equally ruthless son. Her heart turned cold. Fine. Let's divorce, she said with a hollow laugh. A week later, Lucas and Ethan came to find me. Ethan rushed toward me the moment he saw me. Mandy, it's really you, he exclaimed, his face brimming with excitement. I stepped back, avoiding his embrace, noticing the way his eyes lit up at my appearance. The transformation was intentional, completely different from the crazy woman he remembered. His reaction was exactly what I had hoped for. Ethan stumbled awkwardly, trying to recover from the failed hug. It's been so long, I said with a knowing smile. You're still the same as always. The same, he asked, unsure of my meaning. Still old. Still sloppy, I replied, my gaze lingering on his peeling leather jacket and unkempt appearance. Ethan straightened his clothes, trying to look dashing. It's been so long, Mandy, he said, desperate to make a good impression. You know, he continued earnestly, I've missed you all these years. I know you've hated me, but that's only because you loved me so much. Your hate was your way of getting back at me. I don't blame you, Ethan said earnestly. Now that you're back, and Lucas is back, we can finally be a family again. Yeah. Lucas chimed in excitedly. Mom and Dad, I feel like I'm the happiest person in the world right now. With a gentle tone, I asked, you two haven't eaten yet, have you? Let's go eat something first. Don't let yourselves go hungry. As soon as I said this, Lucas's eyes reddened. Perhaps my words reminded him of our previous life, how I had cared for both of them in the same way. But to me, Their emotions were nothing more than crocodile tears. I took them to the finest Western restaurant in town. The sharply dressed maitre d' greeted us with a slight bow. "Good afternoon, Ms. White." He led us inside, and as we entered, Ethan's discomfort became apparent. Years of living at rock bottom had left him with a demeanor that couldn't hide his embarrassment. Lucas, on the other hand, still retained some of his past life memories and was far more composed, though his eyes betrayed how impressed he was with the surroundings. After ordering, I handed a few $100s to the waiter as a tip. Ethan's eyes widened. "Mandy, isn't this too much?" he asked hesitantly. "Can you not act so miserably poor?" "Dad," Lucas said, shooting Ethan a look of disdain. Despite his words, Lucas couldn't help but sneak glances around, awed by the luxurious decor. The meal was a feast, and they enjoyed every bite with glowing faces, listening to the live piano music as if it was the soundtrack to their triumphant return to prosperity. In their minds, they were already on the path to a bright future. I wiped the corner of my mouth and said suddenly, "I heard your mother, my former mother-in-law, is paralyzed. I should pay her a visit." Ethan and Lucas, delighted by my suggestion, eagerly led me to their home. The basement apartment was dimly lit and cramped, with a single beam of light streaming through a small window. Dust covered every surface, and random items were piled everywhere, creating a chaotic and dirty environment. I wrinkled my nose in distaste. "You actually live in a place like this?" Ethan, embarrassed, forced a laugh. "Mandy, this is just temporary. We'll move to a better place soon." Lucas chimed in defensively. "Yeah, we're only staying here for now." As he spoke, he kicked aside a large cardboard box in irritation. "Who's there?" a frail voice croaked from a corner bedroom. "Is that you, Lisa?" Before they could answer, I stepped forward and pushed the door open. Smiling, I said, "It's me." "You." The old woman's voice rose sharply, and her face contorted with rage. "How dare you come here? You wretched little thing." Mary, now bedridden, glared at me with bulging eyes, as if she wanted to rip the blanket off and lunge at me. Of all the people she hated in this world, I must have been at the very top of her list. I frowned slightly. "After all these years, you still haven't learned a thing. You should show some respect. I'm a guest. After all." "Respect? Ha!" Mary spat, only to be silenced by Ethan, who quickly stepped between us. "Mom, that's enough," he said, shielding me with his body. "Mandy, I'm so sorry. Please don't take her words to heart." Mary dared not argue with her son. 2 years ago, she was hit by a car. Although her life was saved, her legs had to be amputated, leaving her permanently bedridden, completely reliant on Ethan. She had no choice but to suppress her temper whenever he was around. She sucked in a few shaky breaths before asking impatiently, "Why are you here? To laugh at us?" "No, of course not," Ethan interjected quickly. "Mandy wouldn't do that. She's not here to mock us. She's." Mary's sharp voice cut him off. "So you're still not married? Huh. A divorced woman is still a divorced woman, no matter how much money you make. No one will want you." She let out a smug chuckle. "My son is different. Even without a job, women still chase after him." She was, of course, referring to Moira. In this life, Moira had wasted her years on Ethan, taking care of him and his family, only to end up old and disillusioned. I smiled faintly. "Mary, you're just as sharp-tongued as ever." My voice was calm, but my words struck a nerve. Mary's gloating expression faltered as she noticed the displeasure on Ethan and Lucas's faces. She swallowed her words, her voice fading into a weak mumble. Ethan and Lucas soon left to handle something, leaving me alone with Mary. I leaned against the wall, looking down at her with a mix of mockery and pity in my eyes. Once, she had been my mother-in-law, strutting around like a queen in my presence. But now, the roles were reversed. Her bitterness twisted her features as she tried to command me to carry her to the bathroom, just as she often ordered Moira around. The old hag really thought she could boss me around like that? Not a chance. I slowly lifted the blanket, revealing Mary's mangled, amputated legs. With a faint smile, I said, "Did you think I came here to take care of you? No, I'm here to make you pay. In our last life, You all destroyed me. Mary's eyes bulged with fury, and she fainted from the shock. I chuckled to myself. Perhaps she was just too happy to see me. Not everyone was thrilled about my reappearance, though. Lisa wasn't particularly pleased. But a few luxury handbags and designer shoes quickly changed her tune. She went from icy to overly friendly in a flash. Sis-in-law, you're the best. Lisa gushed, holding her new gifts with a grin. Not like my old sister-in-law, who was so dull, couldn't do anything right and was a total waste of space. I took a sip of tea, smiling politely without commenting. Lisa, sensing an opportunity, leaned in and said, Sis-in-law, back then, I wasn't thinking straight and did things I shouldn't have. But you're so generous to let bygones be bygones. I smiled softly. The past is the past. Besides, I found my daughter now, so none of that matters anymore. But as my daughter grows up, she's going to need a father figure. Lisa exhaled in relief, clearly thinking I'd fully forgiven her. Don't worry, sis-in-law. If my brother ever dares to mess up again, I'll be the first to deal with him. Then I'll thank you in advance, I said with a faint smile. Oh, and about your clinic. I'll see what I can do about reinstating your license. Really? You can actually make that happen? Lisa's face lit up with excitement. Even after all these years, she's still obsessed over regaining her medical license. I assured her I'd try. But before the licensing issue could progress, trouble struck her clinic. An elderly patient had passed out while receiving N4 treatment, and their family stormed the clinic in a rage. They smashed windows, chairs, beds, and even the medicine cabinets. Police arrived to investigate, and though Lisa wasn't present at the time, they took the young nurse on duty to the station for questioning. Lisa ran to me in a panic. Mandy, what do I do? They're demanding $1 million in compensation. Have they gone mad? I don't have that kind of money. Do they think I'm some kind of cash cow? Once again, I became their first thought in a crisis. The scapegoat, the fallback. I temporarily moved them into a new apartment to calm things down. Don't worry, I said. I'll figure something out. Lisa's hands trembled as she asked, do you think I'll end up in jail again if I can't pay? I can't go back to prison. Mandy, and that old man isn't even answering my calls anymore. Nobody reliable is helping me. Except you. Mandy, you're the only one who's good to us. Even Ethan chimed in, anxious and desperate. Mandy, do you have any ideas? Just when things were finally starting to get better, Lisa went and ruined everything. Lucas, furious, lashed out at Lisa. Aunt Lisa, how could you be so careless? Seriously. Lisa shot back, her voice trembling with anger. Do you think I did this on purpose? I told you I didn't want to keep running the clinic. I should have just stayed with Mandy like you said. But no. You had to push me into this. Their bickering made my head throb. I raised my hand to stop them. Enough. I'll handle the money. I have enough to cover it. Millions if necessary. All eyes turned to me, filled with greedy anticipation. But, I added calmly, I don't yet know how severe the situation is. If you're scared, I can stay here to deal with it while you all take a break. Go where? Lisa muttered. They'll find us no matter where we go. Nowhere is safe. Exactly. Ethan sighed. We don't even feel like going anywhere. Then why not travel abroad? I suggested. Abroad. Lisa's eyes widened. Yes. My parents recently immigrated to Singapore. And I'll be moving there soon too. I explained, turning my gaze to Ethan. Since we'll all eventually be together, why don't you consider immigrating as well? Really? Even I could immigrate? Lisa asked, her disbelief apparent. I nodded. Relatives are eligible. You just need to show enough tax contributions. I am now a high taxpayer. And Lucas knew firsthand how luxurious Singapore was from a trip we had taken there before. He nodded excitedly. That's perfect. Singapore's a great place. So many wealthy Chinese expats. Plus, it's close to home. Once things calm down, we can come back whenever we want. His enthusiasm was contagious as he grabbed Ethan and Lisa's hands. Let's all go together. Bring Grandma too. Mom, is that okay? He asked me eagerly. I frowned. My relationship with Mary had never been good, and they all knew it. Sensing the tension, Lisa quickly jumped in. Sis-in-law, no matter what grudges you have with my aunt, we're still family, right? Family should stick together. Ethan added, Mandy, you've been so forgiving. I promise my mom won't give you any trouble this time. Reluctantly, I nodded. Fine. I'll make the arrangements. When can we leave? Ethan asked. As soon as possible. I'll let you know when everything's ready. I need to head back and prepare the documents first. Before leaving, I bought them some water and food to tide them over. During this time, Ethan called me several times, urging me to hurry. Leaving the country is so complicated now, he complained. There are so many procedures to go through. Don't worry, I replied. I've asked some friends for help. Just hang tight. After hanging up, I returned to the hospital room where the police were wrapping up their visit. I apologized to them. I'm so sorry for the trouble we've caused you. It's fine, one officer replied. But your family needs to control their temper. Smashing up property isn't the solution. Understood, I said with a polite nod. Once the officers left, I turned to the elderly man in the hospital bed and tucked his blanket in with a smile. Uncle Zhang, how are you feeling? Uncle Zhang's booming voice filled the room. I'm as strong as ever. Kiddo. My father laughed, patting Uncle Zhang on the shoulder. This old guy? Back in the day, he could run 10 kilometers without breaking a sweat. Don't flatter me, you old rascal. Uncle Zhang replied, laughing. The room was filled with light-hearted banter and joy. A week later, Ethan and the others packed their bags, bringing along Mary, still paralyzed, to meet me. For once, Mary seemed in a good mood. In the end, you're the best. Mandy, she said with an uncharacteristic warmth. How could there be lasting grudges between us? I replied with a smile. A van pulled up, and the driver stepped out. I shook his hand firmly and reminded him, please take good care of them on the road. As they climbed into the van, Lucas leaned out of the window. Mom, don't work too hard. Join us soon. Ethan looked at me with a mix of reluctance and emotion. Mandy, you've never introduced me to our daughter. This time, I'll make sure to hold her tight. I've missed her so much over the years, and I know she's been waiting for us. His eyes reddened, and he nodded solemnly. Mandy, I love you. See you soon. Safe travels, I said softly, watching the van drive away. My eyes watered, but I held back my tears as I whispered, goodbye. 2 hours later, I received a message from Ethan. We're boarding now. The flight attendant says I have to turn off my phone. Mandy, take care of yourself back home. I'll take good care of myself too. I hope you will, I replied. But after that, there was no response. Later that evening, I sat with my family as we celebrated Ava's birthday. We sang, Happy birthday to you, Ava. Thank you, Mommy, Grandma, Great-Grandma, and Grandpa, she said after making her wish. She opened her eyes and added, I love you all. We love you too, we all replied. Outside the window, fireworks lit up the sky in a dazzling display. As I ate my slice of cake, my thoughts drifted for a moment. I wondered if Ethan and the others could see fireworks like these in Myanmar. Perhaps not. Perhaps they were busy typing on keyboards, dancing salsa, or lying on an operating table. It was better that way.